Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon for our webinar focused on FDA Federal Advisory Committee meetings. My name is Annie Kennedy, and I'm Dystrophy Senior Vice President of Legislation and So we're just going to get started and with a few housekeeping items. The first thing is we want to thank everyone who's joining us today. We have over 150 people registered for today's webinar, including families, industry sponsors, foundation partners, investors, researchers, clinicians, and federal agency partners. And we're very excited to be welcoming and convening the community to really have a better understanding of what the FDA Advisory Committee meetings are really all about. This webinar is being recorded today. We are going to be archiving this webinar and then posting it on our website so that you can listen to it again and access it again for people who weren't able to join us today. At the end of this webinar, we will be taking notes and posting an FAQ, sort of a cliff notes, a summary of what happens today. Any questions that were submitted prior to today's webinar will be answered during the Q&A portion at the end of today's webinar. If questions are submitted during the webinar, during this afternoon's presentation, we will field those after the webinar and post them as a part of the FAQ. So no questions will go unanswered, but they may not be addressed if they come in during this hour at the end of the hour. So on that note, I'm going to introduce our panelists. The first presenter today from the FDA will be Richard Klein. Richard is the director of the FDA's Patient Liaison Program at the Office of Health and Constituent Affairs. He's the primary interface between the agency and patient advocacy communities and has been a great friend to our Duchenne community. This is the program that interacts extensively with the outside communities and within the agency's scientific and policy offices to facilitate patient engagement and to address issues and concerns of patients in a variety of areas, including treatment access and unapproved drugs, product safety, and clinical trial design. The program ensures that patient communities are represented in approval and policy decisions and at FDA Advisory Committee meetings. Mr. Klein's been with the agency since 1976, working in various capacities that give him a well-rounded understanding of the regulatory issues that affect patients. He developed the agency's patient-oriented web pages and disease-specific email lists, participated in the development of revised expanded access regulations and guidelines, and continues to work extensively on treatment access to investigational drug issues. Immediately prior to becoming the Patient Liaison Program Director, he managed the agency's HIV/AIDS program. Earlier, he was involved in human subject protection policy development for the agency, working closely with federal agencies to ensure consistent and meaningful policy for the protection of human subjects of biomedical research. We're very grateful to Mr. Klein for being with us today. Also joining us today is Commander Steve Marin. Commander Marin received a Bachelor of Science in Nursing from the University of Southern Maine in December 1997. Following his graduation, he worked as an oncology nurse at Maine Medical Center and the National Institutes of Health. Commander Marin was commissioned to the United States Public Health Service as a nurse officer with the rank of lieutenant in August 2003 and continued his work at the NIH as a research nurse for the National Cancer Institute until 2005. He joined the Department of Homeland Security in 2005 and worked as an infection control officer and coordinated continuation of care for newly diagnosed tuberculosis patients until he joined the FDA in 2009. He's been in the Office of Health and Constituent Affairs since December of 2011 and works closely with numerous patients and patient advocate groups to help them understand the regulatory process, medical product approval process, expanded access, and other topics important to patients. And then our third guest from the FDA on with us today is Cicely Reese. Dr. Reese received her Doctor of Pharmacy degree from Howard University in May of 2005. Following her graduation, she worked as a retail staff pharmacist for Walmart Pharmacy in Glen Burnie, Maryland. Dr. Reese joined the Food and Drug Administration in November 2005 and worked as a designated federal officer at the Center for Drug Evaluation and Research, or CDER, Division of Advisory Committee and Consultant Management. And so we're delighted to have them with us today. So before we hand it over to the FDA, Pat is going to make a few remarks about the overall AdCom process and our Duchenne community.
Hello and welcome, everyone. This feels like such an exciting time for all of us For my own family, we've been involved in Duchenne muscular dystrophy since the diagnosis of my sons in 1984, so 31 years of watching this field grow and evolve and expand and coming to this day, which feels like such an important and exciting time. What we wanted to do by having this webinar was to make sure that everyone understood what AdComs were about, advisory committee meetings were about, what we can expect from the advisory committee meetings, and what happens next after that, and how we might, as a community and as individuals, participate in such a meeting and contribute. As Annie mentioned, we have questions that have been submitted by many of our partners, and we will be asking those at the end of the webinar. Other questions that are given to us through the webinar itself will be answered with an FAQ at the end as this is archived. So with all of that, we wanted to start out on the same page. We wanted to understand together what we could and should do and how we can help advance therapies for the people we care about. In particular, I think it's really important for us to work together with consistent messages because this is a time when our children can have real options for therapies. And with that, I'm going to turn this over and thank again the FDA, Steve Morin, Richard Klein, and Cicely Reese for participating in the webinar. Thank you. Okay. All right.
Okay. Well, thank you, Pat. Thank you, Annie. And I want to start off just by thanking the Parent Project Muscular Dystrophy organization because I think this is a terrific opportunity for us to be able to talk to people about the AdCom process and how it works and what to expect, and hopefully encourage people to participate. I also wanted to remind people that we can't discuss specific drugs or applications that are pending at FDA, so we're talking about the advisory committee process in general terms and not specific to the meetings that may be coming up related to Duchenne muscular dystrophy. Our goal is to tell you what we hope is everything you've ever wanted to know about FDA advisory committee meetings and how they work. And so I think the best way to start off is to talk about what is an advisory committee. And an advisory committee is an official committee that's formed under the Federal Advisory Committee Act, which is also referred to as FACA. They are charged with reviewing and evaluating data concerning the safety and effectiveness of marketed and investigational human drug products for use in treatment of neurological diseases. This is related, of course, to the specific committee that we're talking about, and make appropriate recommendations to the Commissioner of Food and Drugs. And that's actually done through the review division that is specific to the product area that's being considered. So why does FDA use advisory committees? FDA has a lot of different important parts of its mission. One of them is evaluating new therapies and determining which ones are safe and effective for their intended use, and that is based upon the data that's generated by clinical trials. So clinical trials are used to look at investigational products in particular populations to determine whether or not they're effective at what they're intended to do and balance the safety and effectiveness of the outcome. So it's a very complex job, and it often involves many areas of expertise. So sometimes FDA does turn to outside experts for counsel, and this is where the advisory committee comes into play. It's a valuable resource contributing to the agency's decision-making process. It is advisory in nature, so they make recommendations to the agency, but ultimately it's FDA who makes the final decision. So FDA is not bound by the recommendations or the advice that it gets from the advisory committee. Overall, FDA has 48 technical and scientific advisory committees and panels. Most of them are in the area of drugs, but there are also committees that cover biologics, and there are panels that cover medical devices. The potential treatments for DMD are considered by the Peripheral and Central Nervous System Drugs Advisory Committee. So when does FDA use an advisory committee? Sometimes there are drug applications that come in, and the results are easy to determine that this drug either works very well, the outcomes are very positive, the safety profile is very good, It's an open-shut case. It could also be the opposite, that the data does not support an effectiveness finding or the toxicity is particularly high. If it's a really open and shut case, the agency can make that decision on its own. But when there's questions about whether or not the data really supports safety and effectiveness, should there be special warnings or precautions that are added to the label to make the use of it safer or even easier to use, in terms of adhering to therapy, the agency can go to an outside committee. So meetings can occur at any stage of a product review process, and sometimes even after a product is on the market. And that happens when there are questions about should there be safety updates, should there be changes sometimes to a label or a product actually removed from the market. Typically, a meeting is convened to assist with interpretation when there are questions or difficulties related to the trial data, and the decision to involve a advisory committee is usually at the discretion of the director of the reviewing division. Cicely, do you want to talk about when a meeting is announced and how that happens?
Okay, thank you. The FDA generally publishes information regarding federal advisory committees in two ways. One way is monthly, they publish a general announcement of all meetings that are going to happen within that month during the agency. And then for the specific meetings, an individual federal register notice is published and at least 15 days in advance of the advisory committee meeting. And that particular notice will have more information about the topic of the meeting.
Could you speak a little bit closer to the mic, please?
Yes, that individualized Federal Register notice will have more information regarding the topic of the meeting, regarding the dates, the times, the location, what's to be discussed, and it will also include web links and persons to contact if you have written or in-person comments that you would like to register for during the particular meeting. We also post this information on the website, and the Office of Health
Consistent Affairs,
it's a mouthful, also attaches a link to their website to the announcements of the Federal Register notice.
So if you go, this is Steve, so if you go onto the FDA website, you'll notice on the right-hand side there are different sections. You have for consumers, there's a for patient section, as well as healthcare professionals and industry. We created about a year ago the for patient site to bring information to patients where it's an easy source of where you comment on things. And it's a listing of all public meetings that the FDA has. So throughout the center, anything that we're involved in, we put there. We put the date, where it's located, the agenda, and then we link it to the specific page. That way you're not having to go through 3 or 4 different pages on the FDA site. So for that's the link that you'll see here, the fda.gov/for-patients. That brings you to our calendar of public meetings. So hopefully at some point you'll be able to use that and look through that. Cicely, maybe you could discuss a little bit more who makes up the advisory committee?
Sure, thank you. An advisory committee is ordinarily composed of a standing membership of members. The Peripheral and Central Nervous System Drugs Advisory Committee has a core group of 9 voting members and 1 non-voting industry representative. People on the committee, selected for the committee, the members and the chairpersons are selected for their knowledge and their expertise in the fields of, for instance, with this committee, neurology, neuropharmacology, neuropathology, otolaryngology, epidemiology or statistics, pharmacology, and then other related specialties. Other members who participate on the committee would include a consumer representative who will be a voting member as well, will be a member of that group. The panels during meeting day are supplemented with temporary voting members, so these are not fixed or core members of the committee. They're not appointed to the committee. They for a standing period of time of 1 to 4 years. However, they're appointed for a particular meeting. And they would include the patient representative or a patient or caregiver of a patient who would have experience with a specific disease or condition. We also would supplement the core group of members with additional experts in areas that would be identified by the Scientific Review Division who need to discuss the issue at the meeting.
And while you're speaking, it might be good for you maybe to discuss the role of the chair and the designated officer.
Yeah. So the chairperson is the person who is really has the authority to run the advisory committee meeting. The chairperson has a multifaceted role, and his or her role is critical to the effective performance of the committee. The chairperson is the presider over an advisory committee meeting and conducts all aspects and ensures that the meeting is conducted in a manner that allows for a balanced presentation of issues that are brought forth both by the FDA and by the sponsor. The chairperson also ensures that the public participation is conducted as prescribed. The chairperson also is very important to set the tone for the committee interactions with the sponsor as well as with the public and the deliberations by the committee. One of the most important roles of the chairperson is to balance adherence to the agenda and to protect the committee discussion and deliberation time to assure sufficient coverage of relevant issues and that the committee provides the committee with clear and scientifically valid advice to the FDA, and also to do this within a timely manner. The chairperson must also ensure that the open public hearing is conducted accordingly and that the committee hears from persons who wish to speak as prescribed. The chairperson cannot, of course, perform these functions without the help of the designated federal officer. So that's another person whose role is very important. Steve, did you want me to go into that?
Please, that would be great.
Okay. So the designated federal officer, and we also refer to this person as a DFO in short, is the person who is actually the primary point of contact for the agency for that particular advisory committee. That person is going to be the liaison for the public, for the committee members, for people with both internal and external to the agency. And the designated federal officer or DFO is responsible for ensuring that all committee functions are carried out according to regulations. The DFO works closely also within FDA and across the entire agency. The DFO works very closely with OCA, particularly with selecting patient representatives, identifying who's going to participate in the meeting, and they actually help OCA to prepare a patient rep for an upcoming meeting. So that person's role is very important.
I often think of the chair as being the person who does the content of the meeting, while the DFO is the person who really runs all the logistics of the meeting to help the chair actually run control and run the content.
Yeah, so the DFO, during the meeting day, the DFO is sitting at the table and is actually acting as an executive secretary to that chairperson. The chairperson is doing all of the speaking and directing of all members of the committee, including people who are sitting at the table from the FDA and the sponsor groups who are not sitting at the table. So the DFO has more of a silent role at the meeting, but at appointment by the chair could participate actively in the meeting, but that doesn't happen very often. So, yeah, the chairperson is the one who's moving all the elements around during the meeting, and the DFO is acting behind the scenes or at the right hand of the chairperson during the advisory committee meeting.
Which is very important.
And Richard and Cicely, if you don't mind, could you tell us a little bit about the chair? Is this an FDA person? Is this a physician? What are the credentials of the person that serves in the role of the chair?
So the chairperson is typically someone external to the FDA. Actually, he has to be external to the FDA. He could be a member of the public health service within another agency, but which is a minority of the cases. But it's an expert in one of the fields that are prescribed by the committee's charter, and is really qualified to conduct a committee meeting. So not all chairpersons come to us with experience chairing similar type meetings, but we do look at that. However, we rely heavily upon the chairperson to be someone who's able to lead and direct members and scientifically deliberate or bring deliberations about. So it's someone external to the agency who is a respected member of one of the expertise within that, one of the knowledge and expertise that's defined by the committee's charter.
And Richard, so we've heard the word patient representative a couple times now. Maybe you could go a little further into telling this group of what a patient representative is and what the benefit to the committee is.
And Cicely mentioned the patient representative as somebody who is on the committee but is not a core member of the committee. And the reason for that is that the core members are standing members, and each one goes to each meeting of that particular committee. But the patient representative is a little bit different because that person represents the disease or the condition that's being considered by that meeting, even though they may not be involved in other meetings that committee is conducting. So the FDA Patient Representative Program goes back into the early 1990s, actually, with HIV and AIDS being the first place that patients had a seat at the table. They are full voting members, and so their participation carries the same weight as anybody else who's on that committee. They are people who are selected by the agency through our office, and we generally look for people who have experience with the disease, either as a patient or as a caregiver. We look for people with ties to the patient advocacy organizations who are active in that sphere, because we want people who are plugged into the general sense of what people in that community are interested in and what their issues are. We look for people who have an analytical and technical sort of mind, although they do not need to be scientists, but we do look for people who have an ability to take what might be dense technical information and parse it out and analyze it. So people with an understanding of research design are ideal. The ability to discuss benefits and risks with the hope that these people have an ability to represent their own experience but bring the concern about benefits and risks of the larger community to the table. And, of course, the ability to evaluate the safety and effectiveness of medical products under review. So the patient representative has access to all the information that everybody else on that committee has, which is quite a bit of information, and we'll talk a little bit about that later. But the Office of Health and Constituent Affairs doesn't just bring somebody in from outside and put them at the table. We do provide a lot of training so that we're sure that people understand what the regulatory framework is, what the responsibilities of FDA are, as well as the limitations of our authorities, and are there to help and support the patient representative in questions that they have that are technical about the data that they're reviewing and the kind of input that would be germane to the meeting.
So we've also mentioned the word consumer representative. Just so you're aware, the consumer representative obviously represents the consumer perspective on this specific issue or drug that is being reviewed or discussed. They serve as a liaison between the committee and interested consumer associations, coalitions, and consumer organizations. They also help facilitate dialogue with the advisory committees on scientific issues that affect consumers. So what is the distinction between the two? Patient representatives can address specific needs and preferences of patients for whom the treatment is intended. Consumer representatives offer a broader knowledge of consumer rights and needs, but they both have access to proprietary background information and materials not available to the public. This information is confidential to them, and they often can't discuss that information after the meeting as well. Does anybody have anything they would like to add about consumers or patient reps?
I do. I just wanted to mention, to point out that consumer representatives within FDA are typically, I can't speak for all centers, but I do believe across the entire agency they are voting members, standing members of the committee. Mm-hmm. They're appointed to the committee as part of that core. Patient representative, again, is standing temporary voting member for a particular meeting. And when appointed to the committee or selected for the core membership, that consumer representative is appointed, is officially selected by a consumer consortium group, which is an outside party. So the agency doesn't make the final determination, but we allow an outside group to make that determination.
But they would submit their nomination or whatever through the advisors and consultants page?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
So, Richard, did you want me to talk about?
Yeah, how the day will unfold, because I think that's very important to understand, and how the day is scheduled. And generally, there's a format that's always followed by these advisory committees.
Yeah. So, because the advisory committee meeting is a huge machine of moving parts, we kind of have to have everything to be a well-oiled machine, and so a lot of our meetings follow the same flow of agenda. Typically, when the meeting starts, everybody's gathering around between 7:45 and 8 a.m. Most advisory committee meetings begin between 8 a.m. and 8:30 a.m., where the members will be called to order by the chairperson. He or she will open the meeting and open introductions from all of the people participating in the meeting. He will go around the table and ask people to state their names and titles and what their expertise maybe is at the beginning of the meeting. And then the FDA, the DSO will then have their spotlight and their opportunity to shine, where he or she will read what's called a conflict of interest statement. And the conflict of interest statement is a statement that provides disclosure of conflicts that committee members may have. It may also include notes which standing members it'll note which standing members are not present, if they were recused from participation, or if they had a scheduled conflict. And it would also mention information about the industry representative, which is a non-voting member, and whose role is to provide advice based upon the interest of the related industry. Then we will, it depends on, what division's coming to committee. FDA may present first, or the sponsor may present first. So we usually receive about an hour and a half presentation from both groups, and breaks are scheduled somewhere in between, maybe a 15-minute break. After the presentations by the FDA and the sponsor, we typically allow for an hour lunch break. Within CEDAR, I should be specific to say that our open public hearing, we typically convene that immediately following lunch. And the open public hearing is given a 1-hour time slot unless the number of members or requested speakers do not need to have a full hour, but 1 hour is allotted for the open public hearing. After the open public hearing, the FDA will receive questions, will share the questions that they need to hear the committee deliberate on, and the committee will deliberate for about the next 2 or 3 hours on the issues at hand, and then they'll move on to formally answering the questions. Some questions are in the form of a vote, and some are simply discussion questions, but all are very important, or equally as important. And if there is a vote, that's typically how we finish off the meeting, and then the chairperson will receive closing remarks from the agency, and then end the meeting, adjourn the meeting.
Yeah, Cicely, you mentioned the 1 hour open public comment. Is that pretty standard, where it will not go further than an hour, and there's only 1 hour for patients or their family members to participate?
So 1 hour is the minimum that the agency should allow for open public hearing, but oftentimes the agency does make considerations to expand the open public hearing to accommodate more speakers, which would add up to more than an hour. And we take those considerations on a case-by-case basis based on the number of public requests that we have to participate in the meeting.
And in some cases, there are meetings where it's actually less than an hour because there has not been a number of speakers to fill the hour, and then the agenda moves on. One of the other things that Cicely mentioned was the conflict of interest statement. I just wanted to highlight how important conflict of interest is at advisory committees or advisory committee meetings. So everybody on the committee is screened by a conflict of interest staff in Cicely's office. That includes the patient rep and all of the other members of the committee. So the goal, of course, is to ensure that there is not bias, or particularly hidden bias, on anyone giving advice to the agency. And that's a pretty rigorous process.
Can I just ask for a point of clarification?
Sure.
That the open public hearing is the portion of the meeting where the public participates and makes comment. that the entire meeting is a public meeting. Is that correct?
That is correct. We were just going to talk about the open public hearing, but the entire meeting is open. The meetings are always free and available to the public, and they're designed really to make the whole process as transparent as possible.
So I would also like to add that typically the advisory committee meetings are open to the public, but there are certain instances where we have to discuss trade secret information or confidential information that we close off a portion of the meeting from the public. But every advisory committee meeting has an open portion, which would include the open public hearing. So there are some minority of cases where we do have closed sessions, but the majority of our meetings are open.
And all of that information is disclosed. So when the meeting is announced, if there's a portion of it that is closed, it would let you know the part of the meeting, say it's from 9 to 10 a.m., that it's closed to the public, and the meeting begins for open public after.
Yeah.
So how does the public participate, which is the next slide, which I think is a great thing because that's why you're all here.
So, right, yeah. And I think one of the really important things is what Annie just brought up. They participate as an audience, and there's more to that than it sounds like, because this is an opportunity for the public to really see the data that FDA is basing its decision-making upon. So generally that information is proprietary, and the only one who can really make that public is the company, because all of this data and information belongs to the company, or which we call the sponsor. But I think it's a really terrific opportunity for people to see what the entire process looks like. It sort of opens up the decision-making process, as well as the clinical trial design issues that come into play, and all of the challenges that are involved in the fine points of weighing benefits and risks and the quality of the data. But it also contains the open public hearing session. And so it's an opportunity for the public to comment, either in person or through written submissions. So if people cannot be present or just don't want to make the trip, they can write written submissions. Those submissions are provided in the Federal Register. There's a note of what date they need to be submitted to the agency before, so that they can be collated, put together, copied, and distributed to the committee members. So everybody on the committee gets those written submissions. And then, of course, the in-person section is the hour or more or less that we were talking about that constitutes the open public hearing. And that's an opportunity for the public to stand up at the microphone, address the committee, address the audience, and give their perspective. It can be data. It can be personal stories. I think we wanted to make it evident that what's really important isn't really statistics here, but I think the most effective open public hearing participation is people telling their stories, what the effect of potential treatments are upon their lives, their functions, their daily health, essentially, rather than talking about issues, how much what's the incidence or the prevalence of this condition, this disease. Really telling personal stories and personal impact is, I think, much more hits the sensitivity of the ears of committee members. And at the table with committee members are FDA staff. So the review division and upper management would be sitting at the table as well, and it's very interested in what people have to say in the open public hearing.
And there's also a point I'd like to make is when there's a lot of people who sign up to speak at an open public meeting, we oftentimes do ask that you group your comments together. And you might be saying, well, we all want our voice to be heard. And there's something about hearing it once, a powerful statement. I could be standing up and discussing for 20 family members and giving a very powerful statement that will sit with the committee versus hearing a very similar statement by 20 different families. We often say, for time and for the most effect, sometimes lumping it together is a really good idea. And also making those same comments to the Federal Register. Our office does a really good service to everybody. If you go to the For Patients website again, every day we go through the Federal Register, and we look through every single thing the FDA is releasing, and we put it on this page. If it's for patients, has something to do with patients, or we want patients to comment on it, we create it. We tell you what day it closes by, and we also link it to the Federal Register. So you literally click once, and you're on the page with every information you could possibly have and how to comment.
So how do people participate in the open public hearing? When you get the Federal Register notice, which you can get through the website or looking at the Federal Register site itself, it is required that there be some sort of application ahead of time so that the open public meeting can be planned. So you're asked to submit written comments if you don't want to come to the open public hearing, written comments to the designated official in the announcement by the deadline date, either by mail, fax, or email. And to speak at the open public hearing, people should contact the designated official in the Federal Register notice by the deadline date that announces the meeting. And what's necessary would be to put in a brief statement of the general nature of the evidence or arguments that you wish to present, names of the people who are the proposed participants, and some sort of indication about how much time you think would be necessary for your presentation.
Now, Cicely, if somebody says, I want 5 minutes, does that mean they're going to get 5 minutes?
That does not mean that they're going to get 5 minutes. Basically, when you submit your request to the DFO is going to take time to gather all of the registrants and look at the amount of time that people are asking for and make a determination as to what final amount of time is going to be allotted to each person.
Perfect. So once you get to the meeting, if you've registered as a speaker for the open public hearing, you need to identify yourself when you get there to the FDA staff members, and the staff members will give you a number, which is the designation of where in the lineup of the open public hearing you will be speaking. And those numbers are handed out, I guess, pretty arbitrarily, not in any particular order. But also, if you've got handouts or any other materials that you want the committee to have, that would be the time to give them to the federal official, to the FDA official, so that they can be entered into the meeting's permanent record. There's special seating that's reserved for registered speakers at the public hearing. So people can sit wherever they want in the audience, but when it comes to the open public hearing, they should be seated in the area that's near the microphone, and it really helps move the open public hearing along a lot more smoothly. And those who do speak are encouraged to disclose any financial relationships, this is the conflict of interest coming up again, that they may have with the topic of the meeting or with the sponsors or even the competitors of those sponsors for the products that are under discussion at that meeting.
I do. I just wanted to go back, to take a few steps back regarding any information that a registered speaker is bringing to the meeting on the meeting day. The DFO, the designated federal official, will actually direct that registrant to a separate table outside of the FDA's documents, and where they can put their information if they want someone from the public to see. Any written submissions that we receive, we should receive them by a deadline, and they will be provided to the committee either prior to the meeting or in their meeting folder on that day of the meeting.
Now, what if I've been selected to speak at the, you've accepted my application or whatever, and you notice that I know now I can't attend? What is your suggestion for that? Like, I really want to be a part of the meeting, but I can't attend the meeting.
So the second option, if you're not able to participate in person or to provide an oral testimony, the second option would be to provide the written submission. And that deadline is usually maybe several days or a week later than the deadline to register to speak. So we make that a little further out in the timeline. So you still will have the opportunity to provide a written statement.
Could somebody else there present that day read my statement for me? If it's a last minute thing where I didn't know I was not going to make it. And
so if it's on meeting day, then we'll talk to the chairperson and see how the chairperson wants to handle that, because that will be at his or her discretion. Prior to the meeting day, if you find out prior to meeting day that you can't make it, send a DFO an email, and you have to have that person that you want to speak on your behalf state that they will be able to speak on your behalf, and the DFO will guide you through that. But it should be done with your knowledge, and that person that you're going to have to speak on your behalf should actually reach out to the DFO to register.
Thank you.
So can I ask, what is the typical turnaround time between when a member of the public submits their interest in providing testimony at the open public hearing and when they hear back as to whether or not they've been accepted to participate in the open public hearing? And then is there an occasion when you're not able to accept everybody's interest?
So the dates and deadlines are all spelled out according to that specific meeting notice. So you would need to respond by that date that's indicated in the Federal Register notice.
And then you'll be notified the day before.
So once the date closes, we reach that deadline date. There's a date in there that indicates when the DFO will reach out to you to let you know further information. Whether the DFO will initially acknowledge receipt of your request, and then by that deadline date, we typically do the next business day after the deadline date. After everything closes, we would reach out to our open public hearing that very following day.
And do all people who request to speak or request to participate, are all of them typically accepted, or is there a limit to the number who are able to speak?
So we have to weigh several factors in trying to determine if we have so many speakers who would like to present or speak orally that would go over the 1 hour allotted time, then the agency would have to take up that consideration and try to make accommodations for the number of people who would like to speak.
And does the agency do they extend the open public hearing many times?
In the past, we have extended open public hearing session, but that's typically something that has to be granted approval in agreement with people within the agency. So we take it on a case-by-case basis.
And many times that's why we do encourage grouping like statements together. That way to allow most time for people to speak and to have your voice heard.
It's in the best interest of the agency to have people give their testimony. So we try to do our best to accommodate most people, and we work very closely with the open public hearing registrants during that time. And we actually give you thorough communications on what the plan is. And again, we have to sometimes take these things on a case-by-case basis when we have so much public interest.
I think it's also really important to remember that extending the open public hearing takes away time from the scientific discussion and deliberation later. So that's part of the balance and why it's case by case. And the review division needs to be involved in that decision making as well.
So, and you suggested that people could submit written testimony, but are they also able to submit video testimony? Are they able to participate in this meeting via Skype, and or will this be streamed online so you can have a greater audience than the in-person audience?
Okay, so with Skype, we don't do Skype. We're not able to do Skype. We do webcast, have a free webcast for meetings that are held on campus here at the White Oak Complex. If it's off campus, we can't guarantee a webcast. We don't really offer off location. If someone wants to submit a video testimony, we have made exception in the past because regulations say that testimony should be orally or written. So, but for some meetings, we have special patient populations that we really need to make further considerations, take those considerations into play as far as whether or not we'll accept some video testimony. And again, that's done on a meeting-by-meeting basis. So, and it's done within the agency. Higher level agency leaders will make that determination.
So, one thing that we do want is for the meeting to be orderly. There's a page on the FDA website, which you can see the link below, that discusses the procedures and how public conduct, because the one thing that we want to hear everything we can about this drug, and we want to make sure that we're listening and that we're getting the correct information. And outbursts and screaming, and it just takes away from the importance of being there. So visiting this link is a great resource for you. Richard, would you like to talk about what the day would be like registering with the FDA before the meeting? Actually, specifically, that might be something better for you.
Okay. So what is the specific?
So basically, when I register with the FDA before the meeting, what's going to happen?
So this is the, open public hearing discussion and how that works.
Oh, yes.
The conduct for people at the open public hearing.
So prior to the meeting, once you register for the open public hearing, you will receive a confirmation from the designated federal official that your request was received. Once a determination has been made about the amount of time that's been allotted, the DFO will send a secondary communication out to that registrant and provide you with some additional details, laying out just the logistics of the meeting, what to expect on meeting day. And then you will also prepare yourself accordingly with the information that's provided. Once you arrive to the meeting and you register, we have a project specialist who's sitting at the registration desk, and that person will provide you with a random number that we have assigned to you and a badge with that number for you to speak, and then they'll show you where to sit in the special section we call the open public hearing section. And many times, depending on our patient population, we make special arrangements for the chairs to be, or the sections to be located in areas that's most convenient to that population when necessary. We do have a timer that when we have a larger number of participants, we have a timer that's located on the podium where you speak, and we give you instructions about how that timer operates. You're looking at the green light. The yellow light will appear 1 minute before your talk is set to end, and then the red light when you run out of time. That helps us to keep time to the open public hearing so that everyone gets their chance to speak and we don't run out of time or go over. So after the open public hearing is done, I'll take a step back. The chairperson will actually read a statement into the record about the open public hearing and what some of the rules are. And then once everyone has spoken, then the chairperson will close that session and move on to the next part of the meeting.
So if people have not registered prospectively for the open public hearing before the meeting and they show up at the meeting and want to speak, whether or not that can happen depends on the discretion of the chair, and that's generally based on whether or not there's sufficient time to allow other people to speak who are not pre-registered.
And even if there's not sufficient time, sometimes the chairperson feels that this person heard, and he or she will determine that person, whether or not the person should speak, regardless of how much time we have, but it's really based on the needs of the committee.
And so that you're aware, when on the day of the meeting, you can only speak to the chair. You can only speak to the committee if they grant you that request. So you can't raise your hand in the middle of the meeting and say, I have a question. It's if the chair recognizes you. So that's an important thing to know, that you're somewhat just listening. You're there to absorb, to collect the data from both the FDA and the sponsor or the drug company, as well as the other the patient representative, the consumer rep. You're there absorbing that. And if you're lucky enough to be a part of the open public hearing, you're adding to that knowledge base that everybody has. Just another thing to know, that when you come into the building, you have to go through all the same screenings that we do, just like as if you're going through TSA, going in the airport.
Actually, can I correct you there? For public meetings or meeting days, we have the public enter through a special building, and they actually don't screen all of the people. You walk through the metal detector, but you don't have to provide any ID or.
Oh, right now it's going to.
You have to present our badge, but as a member of the public, you just walk through, and go over to the public meeting space.
And you can bring water in, so it's not the same.
And you can actually eat, too.
Right, you can bring things through, but you go through the metal detector. Your bag has to be screened.
There's an X-ray screening for bags.
So knowing that no knives or guns or, explosives or things like that is important to know. And knowing that, that you will be screened and you will have to go through the process. One thing we do ask is and hopefully we'll work with the many different organizations like PPMD and other Duchenne muscular dystrophy organizations to find out how many people are coming through with wheelchairs. So that way we can let the screening staff know and we can make those accommodations available. So that would be an important thing to let us know, as well as letting Annie and Pat and Ryan, letting them know that you'll be coming, and that will help us significantly.
And I'd like to add, too, if we were to have a meeting, that the DFO would benefit from having that information, because we would set the room up, the meeting space up, to accommodate a large number of wheelchairs if we needed to.
So, as we've discussed before, we look for an orderly we disruptive behavior it distracts from the meeting, and it often can valuable information can be missed or lost because of it being distracting. The committee chair or designated federal officer will note on the record any disruptive behavior and will ask those people to leave and possibly to stop the behavior and possibly leave the meeting room. So that would be an unfortunate thing to happen, that you would miss that important information. We also ask the attendees not approach the advisory committee table area before, during, or after the meeting without permission, again, from the DFO, the designated federal officer, or the executive secretary.
And in no small part, the Federal Advisory Committee Act requires that all of the discussion and back and forth at the committee is public, so they can't have private conversations, really, with members of the public during the meeting.
They cannot, and the chairperson will instruct the committee that during lunch breaks and any other breaks or time away from the committee meeting, that they should refrain from discussing any matters regarding the committee that day.
So I guess, one of the big questions about which has already come up, about the open public hearing is how much time there is available. And as we said, there's at least an hour. The time is allotted for each speaker based on the total number of requests to speak. And as Steve has mentioned, FDA can sometimes ask people with similar messages to please consolidate those messages. And when somebody is going to give messages for more than one person, it's certainly reasonable for them to say, and I'm speaking for this organization, I'm speaking for this number of families or these different people. In very rare instances, there are so many people who want to speak, there simply isn't time to accommodate everybody. And so there may be a lottery that occurs. And I think we've only had this happen one time, so it is pretty rare. But speakers are randomly selected to speak out of those who've requested to speak. And it's done by a random number generator, and so it doesn't accommodate or allow for, specific communities or specific interests, be it industry or competitors or public or patients. It's simply based on a random number. The other thing that I want to mention is that when people come and speak at the open public hearing, that they are part of the transcript. So their name and identity and their comments go into the official meeting transcript, and they're posted on the website. So one of the things that I think is a really big issue, or a big question, is what's the value of the meeting to FDA? And something that I wanted to back up a lot, pretty much to the beginning where we started, was the sponsors and the FDA presentation. Cicely mentioned that, but what happens is the sponsor generally goes through a pretty exhaustive presentation and analysis of the data that they've generated in their clinical trials. And that's followed by a short question-answer period from the committee, or that allows the committee to pose questions for clarification purposes to the sponsor. But then FDA gives its presentation, which is not regurgitating the same presentation, but it's FDA's analysis and thoughts and questions, and I guess where there's disagreement on that data. So where there are specific disagreements on how that data was measured, for example, or interpreted, then FDA presents where it might have disagreements with what was presented. And that leads to the questions that will be given to the committee. But I think there's a tremendous value to having the meeting for the agency. One of them is obviously engaging the outside experts from various fields. So you're getting points of view that are outside this regulatory sphere that FDA normally operates within, and perspectives from people who really are in various walks of life. So there's a variety of perspectives that are discussed and considered by the agency, ideas and thoughts and different points of view or facets of the data come up during these discussions. Input from the public is very important to the agency and to the committee. And, we've seen situations where the whole tenor of the conversation changes based on the patient representative or the open public hearing or, issues that are raised by the patient community. And so, as we said, even in written communications, those are provided to the community members so they have the benefit of that at the meeting and in their mind. And I think very importantly is the point that it allows public access to data and also a window into the decision-making process at FDA, because usually this is the only opportunity the public has to see this data and hear the exchange of points of view. And I think it really highlights the challenges in making these decisions. And while most of the advisory committees do include a vote, it's not necessarily included in every meeting. And the vote, gives sort of a numerical weighting. How does the committee feel overall on a particular question? But what's really of value to the division and to the agency and to the final decision is the whole discussion that took place and all the points that were raised. And so as important as the vote might be as taking a final weight, it's not the most important part of the meeting by any means.
And so I guess it's important to figure out how you can prepare for an advisory committee meeting. And one of the main things is looking at the agenda. Through the link on the patient network, the calendar, or the Advisors and Consultants Committee meeting page, all of that information is available. We put the meeting agenda, typically the draft and the final. We'll put instructions for providing your comments. So how many days before the meeting? 2 business. That the roster will be there for those who will be a part of the meeting. The advisors, the patient representatives, the consumer reps, that will be there. Briefing information, anything that will be discussed during that meeting is a part of this packet. So it's important to review that and to kind of get your understanding of both sides of the issue and to know that, there is different information than I have been told, and being open to that information.
One thing that we don't place on the website 2 business days prior to meeting days are the slides that are going to be presented. We don't provide those ahead of time until meeting day, and you're at the meeting, you receive a copy of the slides, and then the final slides will be posted to the website maybe 3 to 5 business days after the meeting.
So, we're trying to describe how the meeting will go and what it's going to look like. But I think in preparing for a meeting, a very good way to prepare would be to go back and look at a past meeting, and then you can actually see it unfold right before your eyes. So all the meetings that have been webcast are archived on the FDA website. We put one example here, which is the Neurology Products Committee. And so, it's broken down into maybe 2-hour segments, I guess, and you can pick it up at different points in the archive, but you can see the presentation by the sponsor. You can see a presentation by the FDA. You can watch past open public hearings and see how they unfold. And I think the whole meeting is a really good way to prepare for a subsequent meeting.
And most meetings are held here at the FDA. There are a handful of meetings that will go to other venues, like hotels have good conference centers. So it depends on the date. It depends on however many other meetings that the FDA is holding as to where it's held. They're all open to the public. Anybody can come. There's no fee. There's no parking fee. We've included a map on here that is on the website. So if there are meetings, whether it's a advisory committee meeting or some other public workshop you want to attend, this kind of shows the public where they can park, that we have shuttles that go back and forth. Typically, if we know that there's a meeting coming and there's going to be an increase in guests, the shuttle service would change. And we also, if we know that there's going to be, lots of people with wheelchairs, or we also increase different aspects to it. So we encourage people to go to the FDA website, whether it's on the patient page or the advisory committee page, and find directions and proper conduct and things like that. So if you need special accommodations, typically in the Federal Register notice, actually not typically, always in the Federal Register notice, there will be a person who you contact. It will either be an email or a phone number. We encourage you to do that as soon as you know that you're going to be going to the meeting. That way we can accommodate every person that is requesting to come. And when you're emailing, you're letting us know what those accommodations are. Typically, we had a meeting previously where it was for the ALS community, and we knew that there was going to be a need for lots of extension cords and plugs. So we made sure, that those were available. We made sure the aisles were wider because we knew that there would be a different population that would need to be accommodated. So it's letting us know as much information as possible so that way we can attempt to meet those. We can't always meet every single need, but we do our best in trying to do that.
And so people are obviously welcome and encouraged to come in person. It's not absolutely necessary. All the meetings that are held here, and as Cicely said, even the meetings that are not, although it can't be guaranteed, there's an effort to webcast those.
People can also purchase their own version of a webcast if the meeting is held off-site.
Yeah, there's a private service.
Outside companies that offer those.
Viewers of the webcast are able to see all the proceedings and hear all the discussion and see the slides, but they are view only, and those are not interactive if you're on the web. So finally, I guess we just had some takeaway messages that we thought was important, which is that the meetings are an integral part of the regulatory decision-making process. The meetings are open to the public and transparent. The public is invited and, in fact, encouraged to come and to participate. Advisory committee recommendations are carefully considered, but they are not binding on the agency's final decision. They offer a window into the complexity of drug development, and I think just a final reminder that FDA and the public need to consider the totality of the data when looking at what's presented and the analysis of that information at the meeting.
In closing, we'd like to thank you all for listening to our presentation, and let you know that if you have any additional questions about this or anything else, you can always email us at the Patient Network at fda.hhs.gov. We're not just here for this topic. We're here for patients. We're here for questions, and we speak quite often with Parent Project Muscular Dystrophy, but you don't have to just go through them. You can come to us individually. And Pat, I think you have some questions. Do we have time to address them?
Yes, thank you, Richard. We so appreciate this. This has been very helpful. And Cicely, thank you for going back to leadership and talking about the video presentations as well as extending the time for the open public testimony. We really appreciate that because this is so critically important to the community. And so that first question has been answered about participation. I will say that should these meetings be off-site, PPMD will make sure that we have a company so that you're able to join and see this on a stream. So we will make sure that the patient community is well aware of the ability to participate with streaming. So another question that we have is, as you know, we're fortunate to have a very well-organized global Duchenne community, and individuals outside the United States would like to participate in this open public hearing, either in person or through writing. So since this is a U.S. regulatory authority, but an AdComm decision here will likely have a downstream impact on the Duchenne community worldwide, can you comment on how this interaction and exchange is viewed and the value of this level of global participation?
Well, as you know, I think, FDA only has jurisdiction in the United States, so the decision only affects the United States directly. There may be downstream effects at other regulatory agencies in different countries, but we don't have any jurisdiction or authority over any place other than the U.S. Of course, people, whether Americans or people from overseas, want to come and speak or express opinions, thoughts, or perspectives, they're welcome at the advisory committee meeting to do that.
As well as submitting written comments, because if those comments are submitted prior to the meeting, those are part of the packet that the committee members get. And as they're reviewing the information, they have the ability to see your comments over and over as they're reading, and they can refer back to the comments. So the written comments are extremely important as well.
Thank you. So another question is really about confidentiality. So we're all well aware that when an individual participates in a clinical trial, they have to agree to a high level of confidentiality about issues surrounding the trial and the therapeutic we believe we may or may not be receiving at the time of the clinical study. And as well as our experience related to the experimental therapy. Can you discuss how the open public hearing may relieve individuals of any conflict that they feel around violation of those consents that they signed while participating in a trial? And then a subsequent question to that is, the individuals who are going to provide public testimony, will there be some sort of screening process or the need to disclose as the participants on the panel disclose?
Well, taking the second question first, if I understand it, we encourage people, ask people to disclose any potential conflict of interest that they might have, and that might be a relationship with the sponsor or competitor of that sponsor that might have provided transportation, lodging, support for them to appear and to speak. And
it's voluntary.
Right, and that is voluntary, but encouraged.
And confidentiality with the clinical trial.
Oh, and so the confidentiality with the clinical trial, that's between the sponsor and the patient. So there's no prohibition or requirement for people to disclose their participation in the trial or their specific experience, and there's no prohibition except if they have a legal agreement with the sponsor not to disclose that. That's between the sponsor and the patient.
Yeah, because the open public hearing speaker is not held to any conflict of interest laws. That it really just helps the committee members to get a sense of what position or where you're coming from as far as your testimony, and that's really the most. That's the purpose of it. So. It's just to help the community understand what factors to take into account when you're providing your testimony.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thanks very much. And while we're on the issue, how does this relate to clinical and research professionals who may be interested in participating in the open public hearing due to their observations and experiences within the experimental therapeutic products or their expertise with our community?
Well, again, they're welcome to participate in the open public hearing. They're certainly, encouraged if they have information that they think is germane and important to the discussion and the deliberations. But once again, I think it's their agreement with the company and their relationship with the company that would govern that.
Thank you. So, and maybe the last question, I know we're running over, and we so appreciate the fact that you're staying on, and certainly all those in our audience, all of our stakeholders staying on a few extra minutes. So the last question that we'll answer publicly on this webinar, and then as we mentioned before, we will do any other questions that are submitted with a Q&A that's published online as we archive this webinar. So the last question is, given that we're anticipating that our community may be lucky enough to have 2 AdComs that might be very close together for similar therapies this fall, we have lots of speculation in the community about how the timing of one AdCom and ultimately the decision on that product could offer exclusivity and marketing of the other. Are you able to comment on this?
To some extent, and I think the exclusivity you're talking about is the orphan exclusivity, which is a 7-year exclusivity. But that is based on whether it's the same drug rather than the same indication. So if you've got 2 different drugs that are vying for a particular indication, not vying, but that have the same indication, one would not preclude the approval and marketing of the other.
And just to follow on, I promise this was the last question, but here's one more, and that is one of the concerns about drugs that have are similar. In this case, in a rare disease, will one have to be proven superior over the other, or will they be taken into account as individual entities?
No, each one is looked at as an individual entity, and the decisions are based on the safety and effectiveness data that's generated by the trial.
Thank you. Cicely, Richard, and Steve, thank you so very much for taking time and explaining the advisory committee meetings and how we can participate. We're really looking forward to an exciting year, an exciting end of this year, and certainly, hopefully, success and finally therapies, the beginning of therapies for Duchenne. So thank you very much for participating. We're really grateful to you. We'll look forward, Cicely, to hearing more about special considerations in terms of video and extending that public hearing, and we're very grateful for all you do for all of us. Thank you.
Well, thank you for the opportunity. It was a great opportunity to be able to talk to people. I hope we were able to provide meaningful information that helps people out.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us on this call today. And if the FDA listed their information previously about getting in touch with them, and then for anyone in the Duchenne community, if you'd like more information about how to get involved, we'll be, again, archiving this webinar and also producing an FAQ that will have sort of a Cliff Notes version of the information on this webinar and other information about how to get more involved in the upcoming AdComs as well. Thank you again to our friends at the FDA and to our Duchenne community. Bye-bye.